Hey everyone, so this is going to be a Cypress tutorial. Now Cypress is a testing framework that I really love that allows us to write tests super intuitively, super easy, and it kind of makes tests kind of fun. And what I did was I forked over a repository from CassieDo's GitHub. If you don't know who CassieDo is, I highly recommend you go follow her on Twitter because she makes super entertaining dev content. I forked over her Todometer repository, which is a to-do app, but it has some more advanced features than a kind of like a to-do app you might use to learn React. And I thought this was perfect because a lot of people already know how to-do apps work, at least a lot of people do, but this has more advanced features for us to be able to write tests for. So that's why I thought this was a great idea. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and demonstrate all of what this app does, and then we'll talk about the tests that we're going to be writing. Okay, so here's the app that we're going to be writing tests for. So you can see this is the date, and then here's the weekday. And the reason why it shows that is because that kind of comes into play into some of the functionality of the app that we'll go into in just a second. We can go ahead and create a new to-do. I'll create 3, test 1, 2, and 3. And I want to show you the different states that to-dos can be in and that sort of thing. So I'm going to click pause on test 1. And you can see that it goes to this do later accordion. And if I click complete on test 2, it creates a new accordion called completed. So now we have 3 different lists. We have ones that are already completed, we have ones that we've put off till tomorrow, and then we have the ones that we need to get done today. Now, with that being said, you can look here at the top that it separates them into their own colors. So the ones that are paused and put off till tomorrow, that's represented by yellow, and the ones that are completed is represented in green. And what this is saying is 75, or actually this is more like 66.7% of all of my tasks for the day are complete. And out of that 66%, 50-ish% of that is completed tasks, and 50-ish% of that is tasks that I've put off till tomorrow. And then you can see that this is the amount remaining. So this is a little progress bar of your tasks. It's going to send you a notification if you have notifications enabled on your browser that says something like, you have some tasks to complete, blah, blah, blah. So it's going to send you a push notification, and we're actually going to be testing that in Cypress. The original application let you set the interval of time between like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour. But in this version of the app, I actually just set it to do it every 30 minutes on the second. Now, as you can see here at the bottom, there is this reset progress button. Now, if I were to click this, I want you to look at the way that this app is right now. There's 3 different to-do lists: completed, due later, and the pending items. If I click reset progress, what happened here was that the completed items were deleted, the pending items stayed the same, and then the paused items moved into the pending list. And that was by clicking the reset button. Now, if I have all of my to-dos and I don't click the reset button and I had it just like it was previously, if it rolls over to the next day, then it's going to do that automatically. And also it's going to send us a push notification as well that says resetting. And we're going to be testing all of that in Cypress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by showing you what it's going to look like when we're done. So here we have a full test suite that I'm going to run right now, and I want you to watch what happens. And as you can see, it opens up a browser and it's automating basically somebody using the app, and it's clicking on a bunch of stuff, it's adding to-dos, it's deleting stuff, it's doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and it's doing it very quickly. And while it's doing that, it's checking to make sure that it's doing things that we would expect it to do, just the exact same way that we would expect it to. Another really cool thing about Cypress is I can click on any of these tests. So each of these is a test. I can go to any of these tests and I can hover over each of these steps. And each of these steps, if you look on the right, is a frame in time. So I can actually look at every single thing that happened inside of the application during the tests. And I can actually go so far as to pin that so that I can inspect the element and see exactly what things were like at the time that something might have happened. And once it's all over, I can actually come in here and interact with the DOM and everything. So it's super cool. It's super helpful for debugging and is just really awesome. So that's what it looks like when it's complete. So we're gonna go through all of this, and I'm gonna write the tests and explain everything and how that works. But I wanted to quickly mention a couple of things. This app was originally written by CassieDo as a Electron app built using React. And as of November 2020, Cypress does not support testing Electron apps. So what I had to do was I actually had to go in and change the code to make it a normal React application. And in that process, I actually did some things like adding some test IDs, which is gonna help us a lot when we're writing our tests. So we can select things in our tests very easily and reference things in the tests. So what I did was I have a GitHub which is a fork of the original, as you can see here. And I have 2 branches. Now, if you're wanting to follow along with this tutorial and learn as we go, please switch over to the tutorial branch, because that is all of the finished source code without any of the Cypress stuff. So that's what you would want to start with. However, I've also included in the master branch the complete full code, including all of the Cypress tests. And as you can see inside of here, I included lots of comments throughout so that you can see what each of these things are doing if you don't feel like watching the video. So I've included those links in the description below. And while you're there, please go ahead and give me a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. All right, so what we're gonna go ahead and do, starting just right off from scratch, is cloning the repository. So I'm gonna go ahead and type in git clone, paste in the repository URL, and then click enter, and it's going to clone the repository from GitHub. So once this completes, we're gonna CD into it and install all of our dependencies and all that good stuff. So it's completed, so I'm gonna go ahead and CD into that. And let's take a look at git branch. So right now it just says master is the only branch. But what I'm gonna go ahead and do is say git checkout tutorial. And now I want to ls to make sure that the Cypress folder is not in here. So if you switch over to the tutorial branch and you're following along, make sure you type in ls and make sure that there's no Cypressy stuff inside of here yet. So if I do git checkout master and ls, you can see that there's a Cypress folder, but you want to make sure that if you're following along that does not exist. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and check back into the tutorial branch. Oops, I think I typed that wrong. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and type in npm and install Cypress, because we're going to need to install Cypress. However, I'm also going to need to make sure that we install an Eslint plugin. And the Eslint plugin, what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that we're not getting any Eslint errors when we're writing our tests. So go ahead and put a space and paste in Eslint-plugin-Cypress. Click enter and let all of this install. It'll probably take a minute or 2. Now that that is complete, I want to open up my VS Code and open up that folder where we have this tutorial. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in for you all so you can see it. And what I need to do is I need to actually create an ESLint.rc file. So in the very base of all this, type in .eslint.rc.json to create this file. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to paste in the same configuration that I'm using right here, which again just ensures that you don't get any Eslint errors when you're writing your tests. Cool. So with that aside, we really don't have to worry about any more of that kind of specific stuff, and we can focus just on Cypress. And we need to write a new command that lets us run our Cypress tests. And the command that we need to create is called Cypress, and the command that we need to run is actually npx cypress open. If you're just using a more recent version of npm, you're gonna already have npx, so you don't have to worry about that. If you're using an older version, if you try to run this, it's not gonna work. I would go ahead and update your version of npm so that you can stay up to date with the latest tools anyway. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I zoom in here and run npm run Cypress, which is that command that we just created. And let's see what happens here. As you can see, a little dashboard pops up. And I want you to go back to your VS Code so that we can take a look at something. Notice that there's a Cypress folder now and a cypress.json file. Running Cypress for the first time is going to create this folder and this file for us, which is really neat. And inside of this Cypress folder, we have 4 different folders: support, plugins, integration, and fixtures. Now inside of fixtures, you're gonna put things like your mocks. If you're communicating with an API, you can actually mock your API requests, and you will wanna put all that kind of stuff in here. But we're not gonna be doing API requests in this tutorial, so I'm gonna delete this example file. And inside of integration, you can see an examples folder with a bunch of different tests in there. We're gonna go ahead and delete those. And now inside of plugins, that's where you can put literally your plugins. And inside of support, there's this commands file. We're going to be creating a custom command at pretty early on in this tutorial. So I just want you to keep in mind that this commands file allows you to write custom commands, and Cypress makes it super easy for us to write our own custom commands to reduce boilerplate code. All right, so I went ahead and closed my package.json file because I'm not going to need that anymore, at least right now. And I'm going to open my integration folder, and I want to create a new file. I'm going to prefix it with 01. And the reason why is because it runs the tests in a specific order. It actually runs it in alphabetical order. And we want our tests to run in a particular order. So So I'm going to actually put O1 to prefix the test, and then I'm gonna name this test todo.spec.js. Cool. So the very first thing I wanna do inside of here is paste this line right here. 3 forward slashes and then reference types. This allows our code editor to access Cypress's IntelliSense, and also if you're using TypeScript, I'm pretty sure this will help with that as well. But we're not gonna be using TypeScript in this video. That was just more for information. But yeah, this is gonna allow us to have IntelliSense. So the first thing I need to do is type in context. Context is literally that. It's what is the context of the tests that you're going to be writing. And the context here is to-dos. That means that the tests that we're writing in this file are in the context of to-dos. And for each test that we write, we're going to use it, and we're gonna put a string in here. And what it's gonna say is like what it should do. So it adds to-dos. So it should add to-dos. If it doesn't add to-dos, then it's not working, right? And the second argument is a function. Now the function is going to be the tests that we're going to write, essentially, each individual command. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we navigate to the app's URL. And in order to do that, we could do this. We could say cy, which is Cypress's alias here, cy.visit, and we could just type in manually http://localhost 3000. And I'm gonna save that just so we can see it work really quick. And I'm gonna run this just to make sure that it does indeed go to localhost 3000. Okay, the reason why it's not doing that is because we actually need to be running the application while we're running the tests. So inside of here, I'm gonna create a new tab and navigate back to where your project is. So I'm gonna do that right now. And once inside of there, I'm just gonna run npm run start, or you can just do npm start. Okay, it says React scripts is not recognized as an internal or external command. So I'm actually gonna need to run npm install one more time. So I'm gonna let this finish really quick. Okay, so apparently I had forgotten to run npm install. We installed Cypress and the Eslint plugin, but we forgot to run npm install to get all the other dependencies installed. So that should be good to go now. So I'm gonna go ahead and clear this out and run npm run start to get the actual app running. And then the app itself needs to be running while we run our tests. So once this finishes booting up, all right, it's finished on my end. I'm going to stop this and then restart the test so that we can make sure it navigates to the location. Awesome. So it does happen to go to the proper place, but what I was kind of getting at was we don't really want to hard code the URL because we may be running these tests in different environments and the URL may be different. For example, we might be running them in a integration, like a continuous integration server, or we might be running them on a staging server, and they may have different URLs in every single environment. So what we want to do is create an environment variable that we use in order to get that URL. So the easiest way to do that is to actually create a file at the top level, at the root level, and call it cypress.env.json. And then in here, we're just gonna put a JSON object, and I'm gonna call the very first property of this base URL, and I'm gonna set the value equal to http://localhost 3000. So now we have a environment variable that represents our URL, but how do we access that in here? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We can just clear this out, use capital Cypress and .env, and then that's a function, and we pass in the property that we want to access inside of our environment variables, which is base URL. So I'm gonna save this, and then I want to run the test again and see if it still works. So it still works perfectly fine, which means that our environment variable is working perfectly fine. All right, so now that we know that that works good with environment variables, we can actually go ahead and start writing our actual tests. Now, we're gonna be using local storage here to actually store all of our to-dos. So every single time we run this test suite, we wanna make sure that we clear local storage so that we start with a fresh plate, or a fresh slate is what I meant. cy.clear local storage does that for us. So just by running this line of code, it's going to clear all of the local storage out, and now we're going to start off with a nice clean slate. Very first test that we want to write is to make sure that we're able to add to-dos. When we first start off, we want to make sure that we don't have any to-dos on the screen at all yet. So we want to make sure that the length of to-dos is 0. And the easiest way to test that is to use the test IDs that I put into the app and make sure that the length of the to-do array is 0. We can do this really easily by referencing the data test ID like this. So we're saying cy.get, and we want to get an element where the test ID is equal to to do, like this. Now we want to say that it should have length and the value should be 0. Now what this is saying is we should be able to get all of the to-dos on the screen, and we should only have a total of 0. So let's run this and see what happens. It works. Now just throughout the process of writing tests, I like to make sure that it fails when I expect as well. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna come in here and I'm actually gonna put 1. Let's see what happens if I say should have length 1. Okay, great. So now it's hung and it's going to fail. So give it a second. Perfect, it failed. And the reason why I wanna do that is I wanna make sure that the quality of the tests that I'm writing is good. So it should always fail when you expect, and then it should then pass when you expect. And if you're just writing tests and you're not checking to make sure that they fail, you could be writing tests that always pass. And you don't want to do that. So I like to make sure that I'm writing tests that fail and then, flip it to make sure that it passes when I would expect it to. That's awesome. But we're going to be doing this get by test ID thing a lot. So this is where I want to write a custom command really quick. So this is very simple. We just want to go out of the integration folder and into the support folder and into this commands.js file. Now I want you to paste this in. Cypress.commands.add. Well, you're gonna have to type it, sorry. I'm gonna paste it, but you'll have to type it. .add, and add is a function, and the first property of add is the name of the command that you want to create. And the second is a function, and inside of this function you can put any number of commands inside of here. So basically what you're doing is you're taking a bunch of boilerplate and reducing it to a single command. And this becomes super helpful when you have very, very, very complex things that you're repeating throughout your tests. You can really reduce the amount of boilerplate by creating custom commands like this. But this is just gonna be relatively helpful for us because now we have this custom command called get by test ID. And to use it, all we have to do is get rid of this and it automatically creates this command for us now. So I can say cy.get by test ID, and we want to pass in the test ID that we want to get, which is to do. Now let's run it and make sure that this still works. Well, actually we need to change that back to 0 really quick because we still have it at 1. So let's change that to 0 and it works perfectly fine. So yeah, so I just wanted to show you how custom commands work, and we're going to be using this throughout the entire tutorial. So it's super helpful for us. So moving on, what we're going to do here is we're going to create our first to do with the test, and we're going to access test ID, and the test ID we want to grab is add to do input. So we're grabbing an element with the test ID add to do input, which is the input that you type inside of in order to add to-dos. And inside of there, we want to use the type command, and it will literally type into that input whatever we put inside of here, which in this case, we're gonna put learn Cypress as our first to-do. Then the second line here is just saying we want to grab the add to-do button and we want to click it. And so let's save this and see what happens here. As you can see, it happened so fast you could barely see it, but it typed that in, it clicked on the button, and it added the to-do. So I want to just have 3 to-dos in the beginning to work with. So I'm gonna paste this in. I want you to, create whatever to-dos you would like using those lines of code that we just went through. In my case here, I'm gonna say write tests and be happy, and save it just to make sure that it runs through and it's still working as expected. So just like we did in the very beginning of this test, we checked to make sure that there was 0. Now that we've created 3 to-dos, we want to make sure that there's 3. So as you can see here, cy.get by test ID should have length 3. You can almost read this code like it's in English, which is really good. And I save it, and now we have a passing test. And this test is pretty much already good enough to say that it works, but I like to go a little bit further, and I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna paste in this code and tell you what it does. So the first piece that I pasted in here is going to say that the very first to do on the screen should have a text value of learn Cypress. And the very first one has that, so this test should pass. Now, the last 3 lines here, it's calling each of the 3 individual lists. If you remember, there's a pending list, a paused list, and a completed list of to-dos. I wanna make sure that paused and completed list are empty and that the pending list has a length of 3. So that's what these are saying. And I can kind of go through and explain what this is saying, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We're saying cy.getByTestID pending list, and the children inside of that list, in other words, all of the to-dos inside of that list should add up to have a length of 3, and then 0 and 0 for the other two. So saving that, we go in here and the tests are all passing. Now we have successfully written our first test. So far you can see how easy it is to write tests in Cypress. So with that being said, I'm gonna kind of breeze through the rest of these tests until I get to a part that might look a little bit more unfamiliar to you, and then dig into that. But I think you get a pretty good understanding of what's going on here. So I'm gonna start moving a little bit more quickly. So if we remember, we wanted to make sure that we tested the to-dos, that we can add to-dos, but we also wanted to make sure that we couldn't add empty to-dos. So under the first it, I'm just gonna call it an it, we're gonna put another it, and we're gonna say does not allow users to add empty to-dos. And it's just a 3-line test. Let's take a look at it. So we just wanna make sure that the to-do list has a length of 3. We want to click on the add to-do button because we know that the input is empty because we haven't typed anything inside of it. And we wanna make sure that the length of the to-do list is still 3. And that is a very simple test that allowed us to make sure that we could not pass in empty to-dos. So our third test here is to make sure that we can pause to-dos. Now I'm going to go through this and talk through it as we go, getting rid of the comments. The way that contains work is it basically says, does the screen contain the text due later? Anywhere on the screen, is there the text due later? In this case, we want to say that should not exist. So in other words, we should say, what we're saying here in plain English is due later should not be on the screen right now. This is the second because it's just like an array. 0 is the first item, 1 is the second. We want to grab the second to do, click the pause button on that, and then now due later should be on the screen because due later is the header for the accordion of all the paused to-dos. Then this triple line of code is just like the triple line of code up here, but now we're making sure that the pending list has 2 and the paused list has 1 and the completed list still has 0. So I'm gonna save this and watch this run really quick. And as you can see, due later is on the screen and the tests passed, and there's 1 inside of here and 2 inside of here. So you can also confirm these tests with your eyes as you go through here. So that is the paused test. Let's go ahead and paste in the resumes to-dos test, which is going to just basically make sure that we can resume to-dos manually instead of waiting for them to reset. So the very first 3 lines just says, we want to make sure due later is on the screen because we do have 1 paused already. Then we want to click on the resume button, and then we want to make sure that due later no longer exists on the screen. And now we're back to the original state of pending list having 3, paused list having 0, and completed list having 0. So let's save this and have a look. All of the tests are passing, and you can see that as I hover over this, you can see originally due later was on the screen. And as I drag my mouse down this, you can see after we click on the resume button, the due later disappears and the tests are passing as expected. So the next to-do test is we want to test that we're able to complete to-dos. So under that I'm gonna paste in this test. And we're gonna talk about each of the lines that's happening here. And I bet you can already guess what's going on here. We wanna make sure that completed is not on the screen initially. Then we want to grab the third to do and click complete on that. Now completed should be on the screen. Then we wanna make sure that pending list has 2, paused list has 0, and completed list has 1. So let's run this test and have a look. And again, the tests are passing, and you can see completed is right here, and you can see this has 2 and this has 1, and the paused list is 0. Awesome. So we want to make sure that we can delete to-dos. So pretty much the same thing, but a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and paste in this it right here. And what this is saying again is we want to make sure be happy is on the screen, and it is actually one of the to-dos. So be happy is on the screen, and we want to grab the delete button, the third delete button on the screen. So let's actually take a look at what this is doing. There's 3 delete buttons on this screen, and vertically in order, the third delete button is be happy. So if we click on this delete button, this is the third delete button. If we click on that, we're effectively clicking the delete button for the be happy to do. So keeping that in mind, we're saying we want to find the third delete button, click on that, and then once we click on that, be happy should no longer exist on the screen, and then pending should have 2, paused should still have 0, and completed should now have 0. So let's go ahead and save that and take a look. And as you can see, all the tests are passing and it looks just as you would expect it to look here on the right side. So far so good. Let's go ahead and finish up this with our very last to-do test, which is allows users to reset the to-do state manually. Now this is gonna be a slightly bigger it block. So I'm gonna go through this one. I made sure to put the 3 rules that we talked about earlier right here at the top. The rules are paused items will move to pending, completed items will be removed, and pending items will remain unchanged whenever the reset button is clicked. So going down this it block, I'm gonna explain all of these things and kind of explain the logic. So we wanna get the reset button and say that it should not exist because initially, based off of the last test here, which you can see right now, there is no reset button. And that's because none of the to-dos are completed. But if I come over here and click on complete for one of these to-dos, you can see it moves to the completed area and now the reset progress button is visible. So with that being said, initially it should not be visible. Then we're gonna go ahead and add a new to-do called test reset command. So that's what these lines are doing. Now we should have 3 pending items because we just added a new to-do and then the others should be unchanged. Now what I'm doing is I'm completing one to-do and I am pausing another to-do. So now at this point in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we should have 1 in each list. We should have 1 completed to-do, 1 paused to-do, and 1 pending to-do. So that's what this is saying. Then finally, we're gonna go ahead and click that reset button. And what I would expect is the completed to-do should disappear. So then that means that the length should be 0, just like right here. Hopefully you can see what I'm highlighting. I know that my little video is in the way possibly, but sorry about that. Paused list should then be 0 because the paused item should now be in the pending list, which means that pending list should have 2. And that's what the logic of this test is saying here. So I'm gonna save this and make sure that all of this runs as expected. And it looks like it did. So I'm just gonna break this down and just kind of scroll down and make sure that everything is happening just as I thought it would. And it is, so that is great. And that's really the beauty of Cypress is it really makes it so easy to write these tests. And it uses popular syntax that everybody's familiar with if you're used to writing tests. So just a quick side note that we're gonna be writing the tests to test notifications, but if you want the actual notifications to work for the app without having to stub them, which we're gonna be stubbing these, well, I'll talk more about that in a second, but if you want to actually physically see these notifications, on Windows 10, I actually had to follow these 3 steps. I had to go to my settings, and I'm talking about operating system settings, and I had to navigate to notifications and actions, and then I scrolled down to ensure that Chrome was enabled because on my end it was disabled. So you have to make sure that that works. Now on OS 10, I have no idea. It probably works differently. Just quickly Google it if you wanna be able to see how to do that, but we're gonna be stubbing that. Now what that means is we're basically going to say, we're gonna create a fake function that replaces the browser's concept of notifications. I know that sounds crazy. And we're gonna spy on it and say if, and basically determine whether or not it's been called as expected. So again, hard to talk about in English, so let's go ahead and just do the code. So inside of integration, we're gonna create a new test file. I'm gonna prefix this with O2, and this is gonna be notifications, or notification. Let's see, what do we wanna call it? Notification or notifications? We'll do plural, notifications.spec.js, and go ahead and put in our context. And the context is of course notifications, our function, and we can start building our first it block. The first thing we want to test is that it displays 30-minute reminder if there are pending to-dos. So displays the 30-minute reminder if there are pending to-dos. Now this one was a little bit tricky for me to figure out, but they do offer a very convenient API for being able to do this. So I'm gonna talk us through how all of this works. So the very first thing that we're gonna do is we're going to stub the window.notification object. Now notifications, if you wanna do push notifications in apps, you're actually gonna be using the notification API, which is going to end up being an object on the window object. So there's going to be an object called notification, which is based off the notification class set on the window object itself. And there's an API for you to be able to communicate with that class. And it allows you to show notifications. And here in the code, what we're doing is we're visiting the base URL, just like we did in the first test to make sure that we're on localhost, but we're adding this on before unload thing. and we're passing in the window object here, and we're saying we want to stub notification on the window object, and we want to call it notification. So this .as notification is basically like us setting a variable that we can reference later in our tests called notification. So keep that in mind, and we're gonna move forward a little bit, remembering that we now have stubbed notification, so we now have a way to tell whether or not a notification has been called or not. So with that being said, let's go ahead and add a pending to-do item. So this right here is going to add a new to-do called Cypress, or learn Cypress. And I'm gonna save this and actually open up my dashboard and click stop and click on notification spec so that we can be running this instead of the entire test suite as we go. So far so good. We can see that it created our learn Cypress, and I'm not seeing any errors. And if you hover over here, if you bring your mouse on the left side at the top, you can see there's this new section called spies and stubs. I'm gonna open this up and you can see that we have in fact created a stub on notification. And you can actually see the alias name is also notification. So that's also super great. There's a visual confirmation that we've successfully created our stub. Super helpful. So what I want to do is I want to use the Cypress clock API to set the browser's time to a specific point in time. Now, the specific point in time that I want to set my browser's clock to is this crazy number right here. But in UTC, or in JavaScript timeland, this represents November 27th at exactly midnight. And I'm doing that because that's an even 30-minute slot. And if you remember, every 30 minutes on the second, it's going to show a notification. So what I'm effectively doing is moving the browser's concept of time to midnight at a time when we would expect a notification to happen. Except this is exactly 1 second before midnight. I apologize, I said it was midnight, but it was actually, this is 11:59, 59 seconds. So 1 second before midnight. And 1 second before midnight, we would expect the notification not to have been called yet. So that's what this is saying, because we would expect this to be called at exactly midnight. So 1 second before midnight, we wouldn't expect a notification yet. So we're gonna tick forward 1 second in time. And now that we've ticked forward 1 second in time, we would then expect notification to have been called with. You could say, you could see here we're saying we're gonna get that stub, and it should have been called with $2 reminder. And if I just copy this code or this line of text and search for it here, you can see that's what we're calling our notification with in the actual application. So the title of this notification is $2 reminder. So we're making sure that the notification is being called with that, so that we're not just getting another random notification. We wanna make sure that our tests are passing perfectly as expected. And then afterwards, after we run that, we wanna make sure that we restore time back to normal. Otherwise, we're gonna just get an infinite loop of notifications, which we don't wanna do. So this is saying cy.clock, which is a promise. And once that promise resolves, we're gonna take clock and call clock.restore to restore time back to normal. Okay, so I've gone through all of what this does and the logic behind it. Let's watch it work. Awesome. Now, as you can see, we can go through time and see that we've created the to-do, and at this point, the notification has not been called. We tick forward a second and now it has been called, but you can't see the actual notification. That's perfectly fine, because right here, I'm not sure if you can see this. I can maybe zoom in just a little bit. You can see that it shows the actual notification here, right here. So it says $2 reminder and the body of text. Don't forget you have 1 task to do today, 1 incomplete, blah, blah, blah. So it actually shows that right there. So you don't have to manually go in and make notifications work for your app in order for you to test it. Super convenient, super convenient. Okay. So we now have tested the notifications for a 30-minute reminder. We also want to test notifications on the following day, because if you remember, when it becomes the next day, we're going to send a notification that says, hey, we're resetting everything, and then we're gonna call reset. So let's do that. So now that you have the knowledge of how that last test works, this is gonna make a lot more sense for you right here. So I'm gonna paste in our next it block, and again, walk through what all it's doing. So the test that we want to do here is we want to test to make sure that it displays next day reset notifications. And Just like the last test, we want to stub and make sure that we have a reference to the stub notification. And we want to add 3 to-dos this time. So all this is doing is it's adding 3 to-dos. Learn Cypress, write tests, be happy. Code you already understand, no big deal. We want to make one paused and one completed. So we're clicking the pause button on one and the complete button on another. And we're making sure that there's, each of them are in their separate list, just as we would expect normally. Now we're saying cy.clock, and we're doing this with new date constructor instead of a preset date like last time. So what we're doing is we're setting the clock to the time that it is right now so that we have control over the clock, but we don't want to change the time right now. So now we have control over the clock, but it's set to right now. Then what we want to do is we want to say that the notifications have not been called yet, because we would expect that to not have been called. Then we're going to go forward exactly 24 hours. So now we're jumping into the next day. And that's what this, I think it's like 86,400,000 milliseconds is exactly 24 hours. So we're saying tick forward 24 hours. And then now we would expect notification to have been called. Okay, now the last one we said have been called with pedometer reminder. Let's go ahead, go into the app code and make sure that we say to have been called with and the proper text. So let's change this from have been called to have, whoops, wrong line of code here. All right, have been called with. What was it exactly? It was have been called with. We want to make sure that we have this, and let's see what text it is that we need to be using here. So let's jump into the application code inside of source, components, and I'm just gonna go inside where I would expect this code to be, which would be actually inside of hooks. Probably use reminder notification, and it's not, so it's gonna be possibly use date check. Yes, pedometer reset time. So this is the text we would expect to see inside of this particular notification. So I'm going to paste that as the second argument here. So now we should expect that to run as expected, and we're testing it the right way. Then it's gonna reset, it's gonna call that reset function that we clicked manually earlier automatically. So we should expect now there to only be 2 to-dos instead of 3, and the paused to-do should now have been moved into the pending list. So we should have 0 for paused, 0 for completed, and 2 for pending. All right. So let's save this and run it and make sure that this works, and then have a look at it. It works great. So just going inside of here, I want to make sure that my stub looks the way that I would expect. Yep, body is it's a new day, and then you can kind of hover over it and see the rest of the text if you want. But yeah, this is exactly what I would have expected to happen. And as you can see, right before it does that, we have due later and completed on the screen, but then when it resets, it actually removes all of that. So the reset functionality is working as expected as well. All right, we're almost done here. This next test is gonna be very short, but we just wanna make sure that we test the, every part of the app that's important. And the next piece that we're going to test is that it displays the proper date and weekday. So let's create a new file inside of integration, make that 03, and then we're going to call this date.spec.js. And again, throw in the context and everything. The context here is date, and we're only gonna have one test inside of here, and that's an it block that the test is gonna be displays the correct date information. Now, fun fact here, this date, this timestamp right here is April 29th, 1973 on a Sunday, which is David Bell's birthday, who is the inventor of parkour, which I just wanted to throw in there. So I'm going to create a reference to the clock, and I'm gonna set the time to April 29th, 1973. That's what this millisecond value is gonna equate to when we pass it into the date constructor. And then now we're saying we want the clock to go there. Then I'm going to reload the browser. So saying cy.reload is effectively like clicking refresh in the browser. And when we click refresh, we would expect the day to have text 29 because it's the 29th. The year should be 1973. The month should be April, prefixed to just APR, or not prefixed, but abbreviated. And then the weekday should be Sunday. And so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the test runner, save this file, and then run that test. Of course, actually, this test will not run like this because we haven't visited, we need to visit the URL. So the very first line in here needs to be cy.visit, whoops, capital Cypress.env, and we wanna grab base URL. So that needs to be the very first thing we run inside of this test. So let's run it again. It says cy.visit is not a function. Here, let's just do this instead. Let's just set the clock to the date that, April 29th, 1973. And then after we set the clock, then let's visit the base URL and see if that works. And it does. So you can see here that it says 29 April 1973 and Sunday. So that's that. Let's go ahead and write our very final test. So for this test, all we want to test is that the width of the progress bar is as expected. And if you remember, there was two pieces to the progress bar. There was both the completed and also the paused. And we're going to test both of those to make sure that they're the proper width according to the number of to-dos that are both paused and completed compared to the total number of to-dos. So let's create a new file called 04 and underscore that with progress.spec.gs. And I'm going to paste in my test code here and walk you through it. So the context is progress, and we only have one test inside of here, and it displays the proper width. That's what we want. We want it to display the proper width. So we're going to visit the base URL, make sure we're on the right page, basically. We're going to say cy.getByTestID to do, which gets all of the elements on the screen that have the test ID to do. So in this case, it would end up being an array. And we're going to say it should have length 0. So there should be no to-dos on the screen whatsoever initially. Let's add 4 to-dos. It's going to be complete tutorial, learn Cypress, edit video, and upload video. Those are my 4 to-dos that I've written here. And we're going to complete 2 to-dos. So we're going to click the complete button on 2 of these to-dos and then the pause button on 1 of these to-dos. And again, if you think about this, I can explain this really quick. .eq is saying you want to click which particular one. And it's just like an array where you access the first item as 0. And when we do that, when we click the 0th complete button, that gets moved to the bottom because now it's completed. And so now when we're clicking the 0th complete button again, we're actually clicking the one that was below the first one. Because if you click on that complete button, it moves to the bottom. Now we're clicking on the first one again, which is actually a different one. And then again, if we do 1, we're actually clicking the second one. And since there's 4, that ends up being the last one in the pending list. Okay, so think about that as you're writing this and just kind of imagine it in your head as you're typing it out to try to figure out what it would look like before you run it. So after we click all of that stuff, we want to make sure that the progress bar has the proper width. So before we even look at the bottom code here, let's think about this. Let's talk about it. We have 2 that are completed, 1 that's paused, and out of all of the to-dos, we have a total of 4. So that means each to-do represents 25% of the width of the progress, okay? So if we've completed 2, then we would expect the green to be 50% of the width of the entire progress bar, because half of 100% is 50% and half of 4 is 2. So that's why. Then we have 1 in the pause list and 1/4 is 25%. So we would expect the yellow portion to be 25% of the entire width of the progress bar. But here's the catch to that. The way that the progress is built in CSS is it's actually stacked and layered. So let's quickly pull open the application so I can give you an explanation as I do this. So I'm gonna add a third to do. So I'm gonna complete, actually I'll add 4 so we can have exactly what we're gonna be testing here. So let's complete 2 of them and pause 1. Now you can see that the yellow portion here is exactly 1/4 of the entire bar. However, if we just inspect this element and look at what's really going on underneath the hood, we can see that the yellow portion is actually 75% of the width. It's just layered. So the completed bar is on top of it. So it's kind of like an illusion. That's how it's being created. In reality, if we go back to this test, we would really expect this to be that portion of the progress bar to be 75% of the width. And I hope that makes sense. You can play with it yourself and figure out exactly what it is I'm talking about, but we're gonna move forward, show you exactly what the assertion is gonna look like. So I wrote some comments here that says the width of the container. We don't want to hard code the pixel value. It's actually 550 pixels, but we don't wanna hard code that because if some developer, if some engineer changes that width, we don't wanna have to go back and update our test. We want it to just work automatically. So instead of hard coding that pixel value, we're gonna grab and invoke the width on the progress container, and then we're gonna take that width. Oh, look, I just got a to-do reminder. That's pretty funny. You probably didn't see it, the video was in the way, but I just got a reminder. So we're gonna take the width that we get from this invoke command, and we're going to perform some math on it. So let's start with the progress, complete progress. If you remember, that should be 50% of the total width. So let's see what that looks like. We're saying that the complete progress should have CSS width. So we're accessing width property of the CSS, and we're saying it should be equal to width times 0.5. So width being the full width of the progress bar, 0.5, when we multiply it by that, cuts it into 1/2. So we're saying that it should be 50% of the width. And we're using string interpolation to calculate that value into an actual number and then put pixels at the end. So out of 550 pixels, 275 would be 50% of 550. So this would actually evaluate out to 275 pixels, and you'll see that in just a moment. Now, again, the pause progress is gonna be 75% of the width. So we're gonna say it should have CSS, and we're gonna access the width property of that CSS and say that it should be equal to width times 0.75 pixels. And that's it. So I'm gonna save it and open it up. Oh, we gotta open up the dashboard and run the test really quick, see if it works, and it works great. So let's have a look here on the the left side. You can see that it says expect 275 pixels to equal 275 pixels. So that's what I was saying, 50% of 550 is 275. And then you can see the second one here, 412.5 is 75% of 550. So it evaluates out just like we would expect it to, which is awesome. So now I'm gonna just click run for integration specs. I'm gonna click on this and let it all run just to make sure all the tests pass before we, conclude. It's pretty satisfying to watch this go through on its own. Awesome. So now we have all of these tests passing. We have completely tested this app using all of the test scenarios that we talked about in the beginning of the video, and it was super easy to do it using Cypress and actually pretty fun. At least I would think so. Let me know in the comments if you think it was fun. Otherwise, either way, give this video a thumb up. Okay, so that was Cypress, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. It really helps me out. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.